Table 9.
Good afternoon. The Senate Finance Committee is now in session. Our order this afternoon for the bills to be heard is as follows. Senate Bill 214. Senate Bill 398. Senate Bill 80. Senate Bill 185. Senate Bill 428. Followed by Senate Bill 429. Senate Bill 430. Senate Bill 286. And finally, Senate Bill 238. Now, for each of our bills this afternoon, the sponsor gets as much time as is required in order to properly introduce his or her bill. There is a person designated when there are several proponents for the bill as the lead proponent. That person will get up to 5 minutes, and then others will get 2.5 minutes. Our first bill this afternoon, 214, is being introduced by Senator Saling, and you are on now, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Vice Chair and members of the committee. I want to thank you for the opportunity to introduce Senate Bill 214. It's the unemployment insurance computation of earned rate of contribution application table of rates. I hope that's not the longest one for today. But anyway, I don't think we have to, we haven't seen anything like this extreme of the economy impact that we've had through this virus time that we have in our businesses and constituents. Many small businesses have just not been able to weather this storm in the past 11 months or at least 12 months now. And many more businesses are on the verge of shutting down because they just can't keep up with the costs of doing their business. This bill aims to help and provide some solution to this problem. I can say there's other bills out there like the Relief Act, and we're working on bills with constituencies and businesses right now to help out in any way that we possibly can. And I think it's really important. And there is not a place in this county right now we can say that there's businesses that don't need help. This pre-pandemic, our businesses were paying the unemployment rates at the lowest rate in Table A. However, since the pandemic, businesses have now been forced to move to Table F, and it has the highest unemployment rate payment. This bill will prevent businesses from having to pay Table F and keep them back on Table A for at least a year for the state of emergency until the state of emergency ends. I believe along with this and other bills like the Relief Act, our businesses can get back on their feet and they can recover, and we can help them out in a small way. And I think this is a small way we can do that. If we stay on Table F, this is just another added cost to our businesses and a burden to them. And these costs do not exist in a vacuum. They are very likely to pass on our constituents, and throughout it will increase prices for services and for goods. Constituents and those with less disposable income and those with fixed incomes, they end up and they're going to have to stretch out their dollars. And again, it's going to be really hard for them. But with this bill, I think we'll be able to work and to overcome these economic hardships and once again see our businesses thrive. I hope and pray that we can move and urge a favorable report. And I want to thank the chair and the vice chair and the committee for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. We have no other oral testimony. There is written testimony, and colleagues on the committee, you should see that in your folders. All right, Senator Klossmeyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Saling. I just want to let you know that, we've been working on this very issue since, I don't know when, but I understand it. We've been working with the chamber, Delegate Carey and I will bring that to him and we will discuss it. And I think our biggest concern is just the funding and the solvency of the whole unemployment insurance. So, but we will be talking about it and I will let you know, and you and I can talk. So just want to let you know that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator. It's just one of many costs. As we know, there's
Right.
an entertainment fee that businesses have to pay and other fees. And I just think this is
Right.
just one way
Yeah.
we can help them out. Thank
But
you.
the uninsured insurance fund is a vital, we have to make sure that's solvent. We have to make sure it gets solid because it's becoming way out of whack. And the more that we don't pay attention to that, then the bill's going to go higher and higher what we have to pay. And it's going to come out of the general fund, I believe. And so we have to balance it all out, but I'll
Yes.
let you know more.
I
Okay,
understand. Thank you.
thank you.
Right?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, that ends the testimony on the first bill.
Thank you very much.
And we're going now to Senate Bill 398, Senator Carter. Okay, you're
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Kelly, Vice Chair Feldman, and all members of the committee. Thank you for hearing this bill. It's a very, very good spirited bill. The bill alters the current law concerning emergency evaluation petitions. It does so by authorizing behavioral health professionals to transport individuals to emergency facilities for evaluation rather than law enforcement officers. Currently, only law enforcement officers are authorized to transport evaluees to emergency facilities. Typically, this will involve an officer placing an individual who is believed to be suffering from a mental disorder in handcuffs and put in the back of a police vehicle. According to the data analyzed by the Treatment Advocacy Center, it also involves officers at times using deadly force disproportionately against these individuals. According to the data, less than 4% of adults in the United States live with severe mental illness. Unfortunately, at least 25% of all fatal law enforcement encounters involve individuals with severe mental illness, meaning that members of this population are 16 times more likely to be killed by a law enforcement officer than the general population. I believe this is just a very good pro-health and public safety measure. When a person is in crisis and someone files a petition for their well-being, the last thing we want to do is force anyone into an unsafe situation. Introducing an armed police officer into a situation requires a skill set outside of their training, no matter how well-intentioned, and can and does lead to tragic outcomes too often. This bill seeks to reduce the probability of these outcomes by giving behavioral health professionals, persons best equipped to understand the dynamics of a given situation, the discretion to include or exclude the presence of law enforcement from the matter if they deem it appropriate. Not only would this bill take the burden off of law enforcement officers, it might also save lives. Thus, I urge this committee to give a favorable report. I would also simply add that some efforts and work have gone into this bill to try to make it better. There were some potential allies that suggested some amendments, and we were able to incorporate some of those amendments, which alleviates some of the concern. There was some unfavorable testimony and some favorable with amendments. And so briefly, this committee, I hope, should have the amendments, and I hope that you will consider the bill as amended. Specifically, there were concerns from the Mental Health Association or Association of Psychiatrists and other professionals. They were concerned about some things, but one of those things was that the bill initially left off that they would enjoy the same immunity that peace officers currently enjoy under the law. And so one of the amendments does that, fixes that problem. Another one of the amendments requires that should this medical or health professional deem it appropriate and call for a law enforcement officer as needed, that they would still show up under the bill, but only as needed if called upon. And there are some other technical amendments, such as removing the name petitioner to individuals. And I'm hoping that alleviates much of the concern that the opposition had in their unfavorable testimony, but I'm certainly willing to work with whoever I need to work with, because I truly believe this is an important step in the right direction to treat these issues as what they are, health matters and not matters of public safety, where individuals risk the treatment of criminalization and far too often death. My lead witness, I'm not sure if you want to ask me questions or wait for my panel, but I'm happy to answer questions or introduce my panel, whichever you prefer.
Well, if you want to tell us who your official panel is, that's fine before you end.
Thank you so much. My official panel is Greta Willis, a woman that I've known of for many years, ever since her then 14-year-old son, Kevin, was killed by a law enforcement officer in Baltimore City when she sought help for him because of his behavioral problems. That's my chief witness. My other two witnesses are from the Law Enforcement Action Committee, Mike Hilliard, and also David Averick from the Social Work Action Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you. And at this time, then we will start. Oh, wait a minute. Is there another question? Oh, Senator Reedy.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Carter, great to see you, my seatmate until this year in a different committee. And I think I know where you're coming from, and I know what your intentions are here. And I think generally it's really good to try to sort of de-escalate some of these situations, because you're right that it's so often a mental health issue. It is a mental health issue, and it's not something where we want to involve law enforcement if we don't have to. There is one, I was looking through the testimony, there's unfavorable testimony from the emergency nurses. And I think, you may be working with them, and I don't see that they suggest necessarily a specific amendment. One concern, though, that they do have, and I think it's a fair one, is that when you're dealing with people who, that have maybe a mental health breakdown or had something happen, they're the ones who about half of the incidences that happen in emergency rooms, and there have been a rise in those over the last couple of years, come from these kind of cases. I mean, I'll listen to the testimony of your witnesses as well, but I mean, have you had an opportunity to have a conversation with them? Is there a way, can we be pretty assured that this is not going to lead to more of those kind of instances? I mean, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to respond.
So I actually haven't had the opportunity yet to read their specific testimony. I read as much as I could, but didn't get to everything. But what I would say, just from the question that you've asked, is one, this is discretionary. This does not require this professional to do the transport. It simply takes it away from, it shall only be a law enforcement officer, to allowing the discretion if the medical health professional so chooses. And I miss you too, Justin Reedy. And you know that we heard for many years in our committee from nurses, emergency room nurses, who actually wanted to be put into a special class to make assault on them a felony for many years because of these instances being so prevalent. So my answer to the nurses and to you is that they're not required under this bill to do transport of individuals. They simply would be like a litany of other health professionals, be authorized to do it if they so chose. If they don't choose to do it, this bill does not require that they do it.
Well, and so I guess just as a follow-up, then that's good. So basically, if someone takes on this responsibility, if someone else is taking this on and say we don't want to involve law enforcement in this, I think discretion is good. I mean, generally speaking, I agree with you. So if they take it on, then they're responsible for transporting that person securely and making sure that they get where they need to go. I mean, is that what?
Yes, and under my amendment, or our amendments, they would enjoy the same liability that's currently listed in statute that the peace officers now get. So they would not be putting themselves at risk of liability for so doing, when they're, ostensibly doing it to preserve the public health and safety, not to create, liability for themselves.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, we'll go now to the lead proponent, Greta Willis. You have 5 minutes.
Greetings, dear Chairman, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Reverend Greta Willis, mother of Kevin L. Cooper and co-founder and president of the Kevin L. Cooper Foundation, created in my son's name. Let me explain to you why I'm here today. If SB 398 was in place from required to shall, my son would be here today with us. My 14-year-old son was shot and killed by a Baltimore City police officer with 1 year on the force. Kevin had difficulty with managing his mental health since the death of his brother in a motor vehicle accident. He had been hospitalized several times in the past. The hospital programs where he was treated told me that in a future crisis, I should call the police. I did what I was told and called the police when he was in crisis. I did not know there were any alternatives that would have been better. Instead of receiving help, my son, while holding a plastic dustpan, was maced and shot in my home in front of me as I was holding my 10-month-old granddaughter. The police made the situation worse. There were 2 officers on the scene, and one officer left stating the call was abated, meaning it was over. The other officer stayed and antagonized my son. Then he shot and killed him. Think. If the officer was in danger, why did his partner leave a rookie still on the scene alone? We know that racism is a part of this because Black people are more likely to be perceived as threatening if they raise their voices or use their hands when they talk. There was no de-escalation used by the police officer that shot my son. There was no effort to use non-lethal force. I was never given an opportunity to accompany my son to the hospital. 2 detectives instructed me to go right from there to the police station to make a statement. Then I would be allowed to be with my son. I pleaded with the officers numerous times to exit the premises. He chose to stay and escalate the situation. He became the judge, the jury, and executioner of Kevin's life. There was no criminal charges placed against the officer. Kevin was a brother, a son, a friend, and an uncle. He had just completed his first summer employment. His sister was overseas fighting for our country, and someone who was paid to protect and serve the country, the city, was murdering her brother while she was protecting the country. I want us to move forward towards a future where crisis de-escalation services are community-based and culturally appropriate. People who look like me and understand my culture could have been the ones who responded to Kevin. Crisis responders should not be armed with deadly weapons. SB 398 cannot bring my son back, but it will take us one step closer to a society where we do not have to involve police officers in situations where they should not be involved. We need to decriminalize crisis. Having a mental health emergency does not mean that the police are necessary. This bill gives healthcare providers more flexibility to determine whether law enforcement presence is truly necessary. Therapists who serve clients who are African Americans or Native Americans should be able to decide whether the presence of law enforcement is necessary. I urge you all to move in the right direction. SB 398 is a small but important step in a positive direction to save our children so that they can live. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to say that your testimony is most touching and very impressive. Your son would be proud of you, that you are helping, given the tragedy your family has suffered, to make sure that no other family has to similarly suffer, that there are better options.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Are there any questions for this witness? Okay. We're going next to Michael Hilliard in the Law Enforcement Action Partnership.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. As a retired major with the Baltimore Police Department and as a speaker for the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, I am here to support SB 398. This bill would allow us to improve public safety by shifting some mental health responsibilities from police to mental health professionals. During my 27 years of service with the Baltimore Police Department, I began as a patrolman in East Baltimore. I ran 911 and police dispatch, and I served as an assistant to the chief of patrol, and I retired as a major in the communications section. Requiring police to handle mental health issues can be a recipe for escalation. When someone in crisis sees flashing lights in a police uniform, they become more agitated. I was not surprised to see in a report from the Treatment Advocacy Center that individuals with mental illness account for more than 25% of all police-involved shootings. Many mental health-related calls are better handled by specially trained behavioral health clinicians, paramedics, and peer counselors. Several cities already send civilians to appropriate 911 calls rather than police. They have never had a death or injury at one of these calls because the trained civilians are skilled at de-escalation. I support SB 398 because it would stop requiring emergency petitions for mental health evaluations to be handled by law enforcement. It would allow people trained in mental health issues to handle these situations without calling in the police. It would free up police to focus on calls related to serious crime for which they have been trained. In sum, I believe that it is critical to allow people trained in mental health crises to handle emergency petitions without involving the police. A career in policing has taught me that police cannot protect and serve alone. Our society needs to stop putting everything on our shoulders and start allowing partners to step in and help. Thank you for the opportunity to share my experience in support of this bill.
Thank you very much. Okay, who do we have? Senator Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just point of personal privilege, I've known Mike for many, many years, and even after his distinguished career as a police professional in the city of Baltimore, he continues to give back to the community. And so thank you, Mike, for your testimony today. And I just wanted to let the committee know the type of dedicated individual you are. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Hayes. It's good to see you.
Thank you. All right, we're going next to David Abruk.
Hello, thank you, Madam Chairwoman, Mr. Vice Chair, respected senators. I want to thank Senator Carter so much for bringing forth this bill. And I want to thank Ms. Willis and Mr. Hilliard and Major Hilliard for their contributions. My name is David Abruk, and I represent the Baltimore chapter of SWA, the Social Welfare Action Alliance. This is a national organization of human service providers who advocate for human rights. I'm a social worker and psychotherapist in private practice in Baltimore City. I'm here today because our allies, Black social workers, Indigenous and transgender social workers, have told us that this specific issue must be our focus. There's an urgent need to decouple policing from mental health crisis response. So while I'm up here as a white person, I want to report that SWA has met with many local activists, organizers, community members who are fighting against racism, and this issue represents the concerns of a broad coalition of community members. What is the future of anti-racist mental health practice? In the future, crisis response will be culturally appropriate, community-based, peer-led organizations rooted within neighborhoods will be properly funded, fully staffed, appropriately trained to provide de-escalation to their neighbors, as well as conflict resolution services to people in crisis. This model represents a safer, more dignified, and more cost-effective method of crisis response than relying on police to perform this function. SB 398 does not take us directly to that future, but it represents a necessary first step toward it. We know that, for example, police in Baltimore are not adequately trained to respond to mental health crises. The good news is that with the consent decree under the Department of Justice, there has been curricula that have been developed to address this gap. But the bad news is it's only just now starting to be rolled out. So the need to change this law is urgent at this time. In practice, the law will likely have only a small effect at first because it will primarily affect clinicians like myself who work in private practice and operate independently. But the reason it's important to pass this bill is for my colleagues who are African American and Native American and transgender who serve clients of these minority identity groups, where there is frequently a shared understanding that police may represent an active threat to safety. I myself am a queer person. I serve many queer clients, and I know from my own lived experience that unfortunately, I'm just not able to rely on police to treat queer people with dignity. The data bears this out. In my line of work, there are times when clients need to temporarily relinquish the responsibility of keeping themselves safe. It's not the fun part of my job, but it's an important part of my job. Clinicians who are Black and or Native American, transgender, and queer, we need to be able to help similarly identified clients access the emergency room in the situation without involving guns, handcuffs, police cruisers. SB 398 will grant us this opportunity and will mark the beginning of a renegotiation on the state level here in Maryland of how we as a society want to treat individuals during what might be the worst moment of their lives. I urge you to pass this measure. It's common sense, it's overdue, it's potentially life-saving, and I'm grateful for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going next to Sabah Muhammad.
Hello. Thank you, Madam Chair, co-chairs. I appreciate the opportunity to submit testimony today. My name is Sabah Muhammad. Not only do I serve as Legislative and Policy Counsel with the Treatment Advocacy Center, also known as TAC, I am a family member of a loved one diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. The Treatment Advocacy Center is a national nonprofit dedicated to eliminating legal and other barriers to timely and effective treatment of severe mental illness, also known as SMI. We live in a country where our loved ones can deny a shot of long-term antipsychotic medication as a liberty right, but then turn around and be shot and killed by the police during a psychotic episode. None of us should sleep well at night knowing that individuals diagnosed with SMI are 16 times more likely to be killed in a police encounter than other citizens. These tragic police encounters are preventable. Mental health crises do not usually need law enforcement. That's why SB 398, which aims to mitigate police response to a medical health crisis by allowing medical workers to serve as first responders if they choose, is a step in the right direction. However, as long as resources for individuals too sick to tell reality from delusion are primary volunteer only, meaning they must opt in, which is a good and ethical system for most medical conditions, but not for someone with SMI on the verge of psychosis who cannot tell delusion and make a rational decision. They can't avail themselves to badly needed treatment themselves. And as long as it's volunteer only, we will continue to require police intervention for a medical crisis. See, the emergency begins when an individual is too sick to provide for their basic needs like food, clothing, and shelter, and most importantly, too sick to follow police instructions. Waiting for that inability to turn suicidal or homicidal contradicts the desire to remove police from the medical crisis equation. Maryland needs SB 398 to prevent endless and preventable tragedies. A TAC study found that about 1/5 of total law enforcement staff time and 10% of law enforcement budget in 2017 went towards transporting and responding to people with severe mental illness. It's important to also know that people diagnosed with severe mental illness are more likely to be victimized, 10 times more likely to be the victims of violence. Yet we choose to criminalize their illness and arrest them because of it. Thank you for your time and attention. I appreciate the opportunity to highlight the importance of SB 398. It is a step in the right direction for families in need of early intervention, long-term well-being, and treatment before tragedy. I urge you to support SB 398.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And our final witness is Ann Hanson, the Maryland Psychiatric Society.
Hello, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Annette Hansen, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Maryland Psychiatric Society and the Washington Psychiatric Society. We understand the intent and purposes of this bill. It is a very, very difficult needle to thread. Some of our members work on mobile crisis teams. They work on assertive community treatment teams. They go out into the community to offer services to the homeless. They will go to homes to monitor and try to persuade people with psychotic illnesses like schizophrenia to come in voluntarily to clinics. That's their purpose. On very rare occasions, those people may need emergency psychiatric care. And if everything goes well, the person will voluntarily go in with the mental health provider. However, by the time you get to the point of needing an emergency petition, those verbal interventions, those verbal de-escalation techniques have failed. They resist going into treatment. They may require coercion, a show of force, or a use of force. I'm personally aware of bad outcomes. As a forensic psychiatrist, I've seen these cases where a mental health practitioner has been seriously injured doing this work. I'm personally familiar with cases where a family member has been assaulted or even killed by a psychotic person who did not want to be transported. You've heard from law enforcement that their intent is to shift the burden of emergency response from law enforcement to the mental health profession. This is not an either-or situation. There are certain rare cases where you need to have both mental health and security present in order to ensure that everyone is safe. We appreciate the opportunity to make our current law better. And I think by writing in the immunity protections, this will give a lot of reassurance to mental health professionals who are more willing to do the kind of voluntary transport that you're talking about. However, we do have a lot of concern that this may give an out to law enforcement to abdicate themselves to situations when they're really needed. Our organization was contacted 2 weeks ago by a community provider who tried to serve an emergency petition, and the Baltimore City Police refused to come to the clinic to pick up the petition. And we do not want to place our clinicians in that situation. I'm also aware that there's a proposed amendment to expand the type of person who can request an emergency petition. We have some concerns about this because, as you've already heard, an EP is a massive curtailment of liberty. It involves potentially taking someone against their will in public, in front of neighbors. There's a lot of stigma attached. And so we would be concerned about expanding the people who are qualified to request an EP to healthcare providers who are not specifically psychiatric professionals. So a psychiatric nurse practitioner can already do this. A psychiatric clinical specialist nurse can do this. An LCSW social worker can do this, a licensed physician, a licensed psychologist. We already have enough people who are qualified to request emergency petitions without judicial review. So we don't think it's necessary to expand that. And at this point, I've probably used my time and I'm available for questions.
Well, let me start with one. What do you see in the bill that you think is helpful? You are favorable with amendments.
Yeah.
Told us about all the limitations of the bill.
Yeah. Well, the thing that we really like is the fact that it allows for these rare circumstances where people who are already in the community can use their own judgment call and request backup if needed, or not call for backup if they don't need it. The majority of people requesting EPs, though, who are licensed mental health professionals, are not already in the community. They may be working in a community clinic with the full schedule of patients they need to see. They may be filling out an emergency petition while they're working on an inpatient unit and caring for inpatients. So they're just not at liberty to go out to the scene of where the person is at to actually pick them up and take them in. And so we need to allow for that discretion.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Would you say that what this bill is recommending with the amendments that you are proposing is certainly a lot better than the status quo when you consider how often the police are the only entity that are called and the only ones that rapidly respond, and where very often there are negative outcomes, including loss of life unnecessarily?
Well, I think the ability to write in immunity protections for the mental health practitioners will make it more likely for them to be willing to do this. So I think that aspect is good. I probably wouldn't see a need to expand the number of healthcare professionals who can request an EP. I think we already have enough of those. My latest numbers were from 2016, and I think there was something like 4,000 emergency petitions a year that were being brought into emergency departments. So I don't think we're lacking in mental health professionals to request these services.
Well, let me ask you this. So long as people's lives are being lost, especially among a number of minority and low income persons, where the preponderance of the opinions tends to be as the police arrive on the scene is that it's just another criminal acting out and not following directions. And so long as in Maryland and elsewhere, I think I did hear of one city in Texas that's supposed to have a pretty model program, but in general in our country, the police are not trained to make the distinctions or to analyze the situation from a health perspective or to know how to de-escalate.
I certainly recognize that as a problem. But many years ago, I was actually part of the training that was given to the Baltimore police about crisis intervention. And our organization has always supported bills that would provide grants and opportunities to provide more crisis intervention training for police officers. We've definitely supported that. I work in the correctional system as well. We don't need to have that many mental ill people in our correctional system, so we support that. But again, I don't see this as a one or another situation. We need to have both people able to work as a multidisciplinary team. My professional work as a forensic psychiatrist involves working with people who have serious mental illnesses, who are at times unpredictable and at times violent due to their mental illness. You have to have both security and clinical care on the scene.
Okay, and since right now, as I understand it, the police are usually called, and if they were assisted by or even preceded by mental health professionals who are trained to help to de-escalate and to deal with the mental health circumstances involved in a given case, would you think that's better than the status quo?
We already have that in certain jurisdictions. We have crisis intervention response teams. We don't have enough of them. And so I can guarantee you that we would not have a mental health professionals to respond to 4,000 emergency petitions. There just aren't enough of us. So, and we can't ask people to leave their day-long schedule of outpatients that have been waiting for services or an inpatient team to go out in the community. They're just not capable of doing that.
Would you expect that if this bill were to pass in an amended form, that there would be more mental health professionals available because some of the constraints that hold them back now would have been addressed?
Oh, I would like to believe that. I run a training program for forensic psychiatrists, and for 13 years now, I've been encouraging people to do this work. I would like to see more. We're not getting nearly enough of them. So I don't see this bill alone as being a solution to that problem.
Well, seldom in the world full of trouble and problems that are very complex is one bill going to do everything.
Exactly. That's why we support a full spectrum of crisis intervention.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions? Okay, if not, then that's the end of the testimony on Senate Bill 398. And we're going next to Senator Kagan, Senate Bill 80. And let's see, you have the 5 minutes will belong to the new chairman of TEDCO, Troy Lamel Stovall.
Indeed. Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, colleagues. For the record, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. Especially during the pandemic, we are so proud of our technology sectors in Maryland. And TEDCO, the Maryland Technology Development Corporation, is one of our key partners and allies in this effort. You may remember that a few years ago, this committee and the whole General Assembly unanimously passed an enormous overhaul of TEDCO because there were a lot of problems. But now it's a new day at TEDCO. As you indicated, Madam Chair, Troy LaMail Stovall is the stellar new executive director, and he's doing a great job. There have been significant changes already. He brings his background from higher education, from engineering, and from technology to the board. This bill just does two things. First, in law, the head of TEDCO is called executive director. As you all know, in the business world, and especially in the technology world, the term of art truly is CEO. And for peer-to-peer conversations, CEO is the term used. So Mr. LaMail Stovall, when the press release was shared, they said executive director / CEO. I think we ought to make it official and change in law to the head of TEDCO being the CEO. The other thing this bill does is change the board of directors from a 15-person board to a 19-person board with 2 members nominated, appointed by the President of the Senate and 2 from the Speaker of the House. One of the challenges with TEDCO in the past was they weren't as engaged with the legislature as would have been wise. And I think that led to some problems. So this will ensure that we do have a legislative voice with TEDCO's work. This passed unanimously out of the Ways and Means Committee in the House and they had an amendment, and it is up to you all. I don't feel strongly about it. They have an amendment that of the 19-member board, there are 2 members from higher education. One of those 2 members currently is from Morgan State. The House is proposing to put that in law and say that for all times, there shall be 1 representative of the 2 from an HBCU, a historically Black college and university. I'm not sure I think that's necessary. I do think that the 19-member board should be diverse in terms of expertise, background, geography, gender, ethnicity, and any other kind of diversity. But if it's the committee's will, I don't have a big problem with it. So that's up to you all. With that, I am really delighted to introduce Mr. LaMail Stovall. He's the only witness that I invited here. I think this is a small bill, and I will stick around to ask questions. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. All right, and we'll go next to your one witness. Okay, you're on. Mr. Troy.
Yep. How you doing, Chair Kelly? It's good seeing you.
Yes.
Senator Kagan, as always, thank you for your support. Chair Kelly and Vice Chair Feldman and committee members, especially again, Senator Kagan, thank you for this time today. As already been stated, my name is Troy LaMail Stovall, and since September of 2020, I have humbly served as Executive Director of the Maryland Technology Development Corporation, better known as TEDCO, which, as all of you know, is dedicated to economic growth through the fostering of an inclusive entrepreneurial and innovation ecosystem. TEDCO aims to be the recognized leader for supporting entrepreneurial and innovation development while being the critical central hub of Maryland's innovation ecosystem. Although it's also important, as Senator Kagan noted, to convey credibility by being consistent with private industry norms, such as referring to the head of the organization as the Chief Executive Officer. Senate Bill 80 would amend this statute to change the name of TEDCO's Executive Director to CEO. Senate Bill 80 also expands the membership of the TEDCO Board of Directors from 15 to 19 members. The board is one of TEDCO's most greatest assets, and I have to say it's been invaluable in my early tenure. These community leaders bring diverse and experienced voices from the fields of finance, investment, higher education, technology development, and entrepreneurship. So TEDCO supports any action that builds on this valuable resource. And it's for these reasons we strongly urge a favorable report to Senate Bill 80, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you, Chair Kelly.
Thank you. And welcome again to Maryland. Let me just say that I recently was looking at a TEDCO report for a period just prior to your coming. This decision had already been made. And one of the things being touted online as a great project at TEDCO was the funding of some medical school staff at medical schools in Maryland. And I thought that was kind of odd because normally if you've needed something in higher education of a faculty nature to enhance your program, that would happen within the institutional governance board, and they would fund whatever they were doing. And since TEDCO ultimately is to increase lines of economic development in Maryland in many, many ways, I just wondered if that situation, I guess it was already done before you showed up, was something that you have any concerns or heartburn over.
So if you could send me exactly what you're talking about, because I don't know exactly, it could be one of two things. So I'm letting you know. One could be the legislator and the governor a couple of years ago started the E-Innovation Authority, which I do sit on, and two other TEDCO members sit on. And through those funds, Chair Kelly, we provide, again, these aren't TEDCO managed funds, but TEDCO is obviously a part of the decision making. We provide funds to any institution in the state, public or private, that looks at doing things that drive entrepreneurship through research. And so we're involved, but those monies don't come through us. I hope that made sense. And it's called the E-Innovation Authority that I do sit on, and two of the TEDCO board members. So you could be referencing that, sounds like, but you could also be referencing the Maryland Stem Cell Commission, which I think, as you know, is a fund that we have. Again, TEDCO helps to manage it, but it's a separate commission that makes a decision on the funding. And that looks at opportunities, again, in our higher ed places, in higher ed institutions that drive research around stem cell that really do drive some of the cures, frankly, that's related to some of the COVID challenges that we've been having. So if you could give me exactly what you're referring, I'm more than happy to be more explicit, but those are the two. But there's no, to your point, there's no explicit TEDCO monies going into what you just described.
Okay, because one of the reasons we needed you to come, and we're glad that you're here, is that we had gone astray, and Maryland taxpayer monies were off in North Dakota and all kinds of crazy places. They gave us nothing back. So we've been looking at some of that, and we're very glad that you're here.
Thank you, ma'am. And as I've spoken to Senator Kagan and many of your other colleagues, and to you, you have my commitment. One of our core values is stewardship, and we're going to be transparent. And there is no question in my mind that we are focused on how do we grow the Maryland innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Vice Chair.
Yeah, just a quick question for Senator Kagan. So I'm just looking at the language, because about the membership, the 4 new members, and I'm looking at that section C, and just so I don't know if it's me, clearly Ways and Means didn't find it a little confusing, but we're talking about 4 new members, and then you list 5 what looks like criteria. So what is the intent there is to, when I first read it, I thought there would be 4 boxes to check to fill the 4 people, but are those just 5 guidelines to fill the 4 slots? Because it's sort of, I could read that a little bit kind of differently. It's, you list specific 4 and then you throw out member of the general public. So I find that language a little vague, kind of confusing.
Thank you, Senator Feldman. When we started drafting this bill, we were thinking about checking the box. I frankly had a conversation with Secretary of the Appointments for the governor, Chris Cavey, and sort of finding a woman, Latina from Western Maryland with expertise in procurement is kind of an impossible needle in the haystack. And so rather than, checking a million boxes and requiring specific criteria, we just set up guidelines. And so,
okay, so if it turns out that the 4 are all from the nonprofit research sector, that would be not, in conflict with the bill, right? I mean, the way it reads, you could put all 4 from one of those 4 criteria?
We wanted to offer both the governor and the speaker and president some flexibility. And if it's in the committee's wisdom to clarify, modify, and make it tighter, that will be up to you.
Okay. Okay.
This
I
is,
just want to
this is
put
your
that out
product
there.
now.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you for the question, Senator.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Augustine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just as a follow-up to Senator Feldman's question, and it's good to see you, Mr. Lamel Stovall. What is the current composition of the current board as it relates to these different groupings? I mean, I see there's a little bit more specificity on what the governor needs to do, but what does that look like? I'm also just curious because this is a year of equity and inclusion. What does this board look like with regard to equity and inclusion, African Americans, women? Where are we today?
Yep.
We're trying to look at where this is supposed to go going forward.
Yes, sir. Again, great seeing you as well. Thank you for the question. A couple of pieces in that. So in terms of the current requirements that the governor feels, obviously, each seat has a specific. So there's a seat, for instance, for a couple of seats, I should say, because we got a couple of open that are around someone from the community college area or someone from the rural area, someone around technology development and entrepreneurship. So each of the seats has kind of, if you will, a criteria associated with it currently. As far as the current board, and if I get this wrong, I got Jody who'll send me a note if I get this wrong. Right now we have 3 Black individuals on the board right now. We have a couple of Asian descent. I'm in my head counting 2 women on the board right now, and I think that covers it. If I'm wrong, I'll send you that, but that sounds about right.
Thank you.
Got to get some more women on that board.
Amen.
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 Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Senator Kagan, you had alluded to an amendment that the House had. Have they already in process adopted that amendment, or are they?
Thank you, Senator Hayes. Thank you for the question. And again, I'm fine with this amendment. This is the committee's product now. Just wanted to let you know that there is someone from Morgan State currently on the board, and the question is whether you want to lock that in through legislation. On page 3, line 8, after universities in the bill, they are proposing, quote, at least one of whom shall represent an historically Black college or university. And with that amendment, favorable with amendment, the committee, Ways and Means Committee unanimously is recommending that to the full House.
Gotcha. And so they've, the question was like far as process right now, have they already adopted that amendment?
Favorable with amendment. It hasn't gone to the floor yet because the House hasn't been around to focus on these issues yet.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you so much.
The thing that worries me about it is it could be limiting rather than expansive. You know, you just say, okay, we've done that, we've checked that one box, and now we're done there. And we've, okay.
Madam Chair, that's a little bit my consideration. My concern is I think the board should be diverse in all ways, but I'm not sure whether putting it in just one box and just saying HBCUs just for the higher ed as opposed to the nonprofit or the you know, president's choices or whatever. I don't want to feel like this is going to be limited.
Okay.
Senator Kelly, if I may, as I said, I knew I was going to get something wrong, and so Jody's real time with me. We have 5 women on the board. She reminded me we have 5 women currently on the board. Actually 6. Not Jody's correcting me. I'm thinking through. I'm counting now in my head. We have 6 women of the board of the 15 currently, and the current chair is a woman. Myra Norton is our current chair.
Who's great.
She's been huge. And then our current vice chair is Tina. Tina is our vice chair. So women, 6 of the 15 right now are women.
And you said how many vacancies, Troy, right now?
3 definite vacancies, and 3 definite vacancies, Senator.
Okay, that ends our testimony on this good bill. We'll make it even better. And thanks so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Have a good day. Be safe.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Senator Kagan, you can stay in place for Senate Bill 185. Financial Institution Security Questions and Measures.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Again, for the record, Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. Appreciate being with all of you on the Finance Committee. So mother's maiden name has been a security question since 1882. And I get to watch all your faces as I read these names: Alford, Claytor, Frisbee, Guillory, Hausler, Hudson, Kerman, Nossel, Coster, Rideout, and Wattsman. Every one of those names was deduced. That's all of your mother's maiden names. All of that was available with easily accessible information online. So why does that matter? Because with that information, I could get into your bank account and wipe out your life savings. This bill proposes simply to make mother's maiden name not the deferred and only choice. Now, a couple years ago, I brought this bill and we just said, can't use mother's maiden name at all. We did meet with the bankers and they asked for some flexibility. So first off, to clarify, this is prospective, not retrospective. So if mother's maiden name is the security question on your bank account currently, the bank will not demand that you change it. New account holders will be given, if this bill were to pass, were to be given at least one other option. So we looked at some other random companies because most folks don't use mother's maiden name because they know how insecure it is. Xfinity offers 10 options. PayPal offers 8, and none of them are mother's maiden name. United Airlines, 15 options. None of them are mother's maiden names. Now, a lot of folks say, but I remember my mother's maiden name. That's easy. And so then I won't forget it because I have too many passwords. And I totally understand that. We all are afflicted with that challenge. And yet, if it's your favorite pet or your first grade teacher, or there are a million, the street where you first grew up, or just make up a password. There are a million other options that will keep your finances much more secure. There are also situations where people have 2 dads now. So what would they choose for mother's maiden name? Or 2 moms? Or mom might keep her maiden name and not change it even in marriage, which makes it insanely not a security question. So, so this is going to make it a little safer. There was just briefly, in 2005, Indiana University of Bloomington did a study, and they were able to find the mother's maiden name for over 4.1 million Texans, 18% of the state's total population. It's not hard to get this information. So with this, I think it's a fairly basic bill. It's about consumer protection and consumer privacy and keeping your life savings safe. So with that, I do have 3 witnesses. I'm delighted to have Katrina Fitzgerald from the super effective and widely respected Electronic Privacy Information Center. She's my lead proponent, followed by Mindy Lehman from the Maryland Bankers Association and Isadora Stern from the Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition. So thank you for your attention, colleagues. Happy to take questions.
Are there any questions? I did have one, but I'll wait for Mindy. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Let's go to Cedriona Fitzgerald.
Chairwoman Kelly, Vice Chair Feldman, and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to testify today in support of Senate Bill 185. My name is Katrina Fitzgerald, and I am Interim Associate Director and Policy Director at the Electronic Privacy Information Center, or EPIC, based in Washington, D.C. EPIC is a public interest research center established in 1994 to focus public attention on emerging privacy and civil liberties issues. And EPIC has long advocated for cybersecurity safeguards for consumer information held by financial and commercial organizations. As Senator Kagan mentioned, Senate Bill 185 simply requires financial institutions who choose to use security questions for user verification to provide customers with more than one security question option. We're all familiar with the situation. You create an online account, You set a password and the site asks you to answer one or more security questions in case you need to reset your password or verify your identity in the future. You know, what's your mother's maiden name? What city were you born in? What's your pet's name? But the problem is that the answer to many of those security questions is not secret. But banks are using these not so secret questions as the sole barrier to gain access to your account. You know, the requirement that your password contain one uppercase letter, one lowercase letter, one symbol, and one number is meaningless if all that's required to bypass that password is your mother's maiden name. It's, you know, the online equivalent of locking the front door but leaving the back door open. And this isn't hypothetical. You know, during the 2008 US presidential election campaign, Vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin's personal Yahoo email account was hacked by a 20-year-old college student who just looked up the answers to her security questions. It was her birth date and where she met her husband, and he guessed that it was high school, and subsequently changed her password and gained access to her email account. In 2005, Paris Hilton's T-Mobile account was improperly accessed by a teenager who did a quick online search for Paris Hilton Chihuahua, and therefore could answer the secret question of what's your favorite pet's name. But this weakness doesn't just apply to celebrities. You know, Senator Kagan showed in this age of so much information being available about us all online, we're all vulnerable to this. And the question of what's your mother's maiden name is possibly the least secure of all security question options. You know, your mother's maiden name may in fact be your last name. Even if it's not, it's obviously easily discoverable through an internet search and obituaries, wedding and birth announcements, social media posts. So, you know, in Epic's opinion, financial institutions should not even offer this question as an option, but at minimum, they must offer other options, as Senate Bill 185 requires. You know, the weakness of security questions as an authenticator is not new news. Experts have been writing about this for years. Those high-profile breaches I mentioned happened over 10 years ago. In 2017, 4 years ago, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, updated its digital identity guidelines and removed its previous recommendation for security questions as an authenticator. So financial institutions know that security questions are not considered a cybersecurity best practice. This won't be news to them. There are plenty of alternative authentication methods available today. So financial institutions should truly no longer be using basic security questions. Epic would recommend that they follow the guidelines set out by NIST that I mentioned earlier. But if security questions are going to be used, institutions should ensure that multiple questions options are given. So although I'd love to see them go away completely, Senate Bill 185 is definitely a step in the right direction in protecting Marylanders against identity theft. And I encourage the committee to give it a favorable report. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay. And our next, Mindy Lehman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Mindy Lehman. I'm the Senior Vice President of Government Relations for the Maryland Bankers Association, here to testify in support of Senate Bill 185. Thank you, Senator Kagan, I think that was a very good description of the bill, and we appreciated the opportunity to work with you during the interim on this legislation, and we do support the bill as introduced. As Senator Kagan explained in her testimony, what the bill does is it requires, if a security question is asked with regard to a bank account, that at least 2 security questions be provided. It's important that account holders are able to access and reply to these security questions in a way that is memorable, but banks absolutely prioritize the security of their customers' accounts and extend significant efforts to safeguard those accounts. And I did want to clarify, just from the prior testifier's testimony, banks use a multi-factor authentication process. So you can't just access, just by knowing someone's, the answer to the security question, for example, just knowing the name of their pet, or in this case, their mother's maiden name, that is not going to give you the ability to access that individual's account. So I just wanted to clarify that. I don't want that, potentially that misperception to remain. So you have a copy of my written testimony. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? And you just answered my question, Mindy. Okay. If not, then we're going next to Isadora Stern.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. Thank you to Senator Kagan for inviting me to speak in support of SB 185. My name is Isadora Stern, and I am here today with the Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition. MCRC is a statewide coalition that works to bring financial inclusion and justice to all Marylanders through our advocacy, direct service, education, and research. We see this bill as a common sense bill and one that will expand protections for consumers, especially it's important now during the COVID-19 pandemic, as we've seen an increase in scams and fraud online. COVID-19 has given scammers access to people's fears of the virus and use that to create a lot of scams online. We have seen the Consumer Federation of America expand access and resources for consumers around those scams, providing protections for them. We've initiated our own program, we call it Scam Busters, where we give access to those scams, prevalent scams that we're seeing to our members and our supporters. We also have a program at MCRC, it's the Securing Older Adult Resources Program, we call it SOAR, where we work with older adults to provide financial coaching and counseling, and now digital privacy trainings as well. Older adults are particularly vulnerable to online scams, and so because of their lack of digital literacy. So providing more security is just a good step in the right direction for older adults and all consumers here. As Senator Kagan mentioned and previous folks as well, this is an old system. It was developed in the 1800s, and those questions that may have been more secure then are not now with access to online data and social media accounts. So this is a step in the right direction to expand protection for consumers, and we encourage you to consider giving this bill a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, sounds like a good bill. This time has probably come. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. That's the end of the testimony on this bill. Okay.
Madam Chair, Senator Kagan wanted to add something. I don't know if you want to.
Yes.
Oh, I was waving goodbye. Thank you, Mr. Vice
Oh,
Chair.
okay.
So sorry. Thank you.
Never mind.
Okay. Okay. All right. I'm up. Senator Feldman.
Okay. Okay, we're going to go to the first of two Senate bills. Actually, first of three. We're going to start with Senate Bill 429. Senator Kelly. Senate Bill 429. The floor is yours.
You don't want 428 first?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. 428. Let's go to.
Okay. Thank you. These three bills have been requested by the Public Service Commission, and Senate Bill 428 changes the annual dates for three routine reports, which the Public Service Commission is required to generate. Certain routine annual reports are required to be published by May 1st instead of the third Wednesday of March. That's what the first thing is that would change. Secondly, the annual report detailing the status of certain programs to promote energy conservation among low to moderate income ratepayers is required under this bill to move from an unspecified date in December to a date on or before January 1st each year. And the third date change, the annual report to the General Assembly regarding the patterns of bill assistance and of arrearage retirement statistical changes would move from on or before December to on or before January 1st of each year. In addition, this bill requires a change of date from on or before December to January 1st of each year for the Department of Housing and Community Development to report to the General Assembly on low-income residential weatherization components of the Electrical Universal Service Program. The effective date for enactment of this legislation is June 1, 2021, and I ask for your support on this bill.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Any questions for the chair? We only have one witness, Lisa Smith from the Public Service Commission. Before we go to her in her 5 minutes, any quick questions for Chair Kelly? Okay, seeing none, we're going to go to you, Ms. Smith. You are the only witness designated as the lead witness here, so you've got 5 minutes. So go on, proceed.
Thank you, Vice Chair Feldman. I'm sure this will take less time than that. And thank you, Chair Kelly, for sponsoring this bill. This is a cleanup bill. We did a review of all of the mandatory reports for the General Assembly, and in our efforts to provide the most robust information in the most timely manner, we took a look at the reports where we were unable to meet deadlines due to needing additional information from utilities in the case of Empower. Also, utilities in the case of the annual report. We require data from OHEP for our Electric Universal Service Program report. So this is very simple, just moving the dates by a month or 2 months to make sure we can get the necessary information from those entities based on when they have the data, and we can just continue to provide you with helpful information, and it'll be on a more regular schedule and we can be on time. And that's really all I have today, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Any questions for Ms. Smith from the PSC? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 428. And we will now move to the second of the 3 bills, Senate Bill 429. Senator Kelly.
Thank you. Senate Bill 429 for higher driving and vehicles requirements. The Public Service Commission is tasked not only with regulation of electric and gas utility rates, but also has oversight on persons engaged in the public transportation of individual for hire in vehicles such as cars, vans, limousines, and buses. Senate Bill 429 makes administrative changes to the for hire drivers and vehicle application process. It eliminates the requirement for Baltimore City taxi drivers to take an education course, changes the way information is displayed on taxicabs, and removes taxicabs from the exemption of motor vehicles not required to have seatbelts in their vehicle. These provisions support for hire drivers, for hire licensed companies, and ultimately boost safety for the public as well. Currently, for hire drivers must file their application providing 2 recent photographs in a size that can be attached to the license. Maryland Public Service Commission worked with the Maryland Motor Vehicle Administration so that a Maryland driver does not have to submit or be photographed by the commission, but can give permission to use their license photo from the MVA. This means the applicant does not have to take time away from work to travel to the commission's office, which is important since during this time of, especially during this time of the COVID-19 pandemic. Commission rules dictate that an individual seeking a Baltimore City taxicab license or renewal of a Baltimore City taxicab license must submit proof of successfully completing an approved commission course that includes in the curriculum courteous treatment of passengers, geography and map reading for the jurisdiction in which the taxicab service is provided, and tourist information for the jurisdiction the taxicab service provides. Senate Bill 429 eliminates the required course for Baltimore City taxicab drivers. The course is no longer needed and is outdated due to the development of electronic assistance in taxicabs, such as GPS and other navigational systems. The course requirement is only for Baltimore City taxicab drivers. However, with the vast changes in the transportation industry, for an example, Uber and Lyft, The current requirement is not fair and creates an added expense not equally required for other transportation services. Under the current rules, this could potentially delay the licensing of drivers since the course may not be offered due to the pandemic. Senate Bill 429 also reduces the lettering requirement of the taxi cab permit holders' information on the vehicle, potentially saving the permit holder money. Senate Bill 429 also expands requirements for the operation of limousines, etc., to include many drivers that operate motor vehicles for hire in Maryland. Finally, Senate Bill 429 removes taxicabs from a limited list of motor vehicles not required to have seatbelts in their vehicles. The current language is outdated. This important measure will mean the riding public will be able to use seatbelts as intended by the vehicle manufacturer and Maryland laws. I therefore ask for your support to pass Senate Bill 429.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Before we turn over to the two Public Service Commission witnesses, any questions for Chair Kelly on Senate Bill 429? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Smith, we're going to go back to you. You've got 5 minutes. And then I know we've got one additional witness signed up from the PSC, but Lisa, you've got 5 minutes on Senate Bill 429.
Thank you, Vice Chair Feldman. And good afternoon, members of the committee. Thank you again, Chair Kelly, for bringing forward this important bill that the Public Service Commission also believes is necessary to bring our for-hire driver statutes up to date with modern times. And particularly, some of these provisions are important in light of the pandemic, as Chair Kelly mentioned. Our other witness that we have signed up is Christopher Cormer, our Director of Transportation. And I just mentioned him right up front because this really comes from our transportation division. They are working hard every day, especially throughout the pandemic. They have folks at our office, many are former law enforcement, including Chris and Mr. Cormer, and they have been working hard to streamline things for the for-hire drivers and the companies, and to utilize some of the executive orders in place due to the pandemic to waive certain requirements as necessary. So they have they brought to me some ideas on how to bring the code up to date, and Chair Kelly already outlined several of the provisions. So I'll try to be brief and just mention how some of these provisions will benefit the public, the drivers, and the for-hire companies. I'd like to also mention that the Limousine Association supports this legislation, and Z-Trip, the largest taxi association that we oversee, also supports this legislation. And we've also we've also checked with the Maryland State Police and the Department of Transportation and Motor Vehicles Administration, and they did not have any issues either. So I'll mention the transportation article updates will make the enforcement of safety laws equal for limousines and other for-hire vehicles and drivers. It doesn't make sense to have different safety provisions and enforcement depending on what type of vehicle it is. It's the same risk to the public when we license drivers to take person safety into their hands. Also, for the public utility article, we worked really hard to streamline the process with the MVA to make sure those driver's licenses can be provided electronically. It used to be that folks had to come downtown to our offices, come to the 16th floor in person, come to the front desk. It's no longer necessary. The safety benefits still accrue from this electronic process that Mr. Cormer's team has worked on, and that MVA has signed an MOU with the commission. So these updates merely reflect current practice. That's all. It doesn't change that in terms of operation. It's just updating the code so it reflects what we're currently doing. And it also eliminates the need for that driving course for city-only drivers. This did not apply anywhere else in the state, so another inequity there. And this is the course is just one more obstacle to getting licensed. We know employment is a big issue right now. We want to make things as easy as possible for folks. And here it's just unnecessary. We have GPS, phones, things like that. We don't need a map reading course, and the scheduling really holds up their ability to work. And another little obstacle was the having names on the taxis. This is unnecessary. We already have the numbers on taxis, which allows us to do enforcement. The public can already identify the taxi by looking at the number on it, and the taxi companies have records of who is driving them. So I'm happy to be here to explain anything else. If you have any questions, and Mr. Cormer is here as well. Thank you so much for your time, and we urge a favorable vote on Senate Bill 429.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Smith. Any questions for Lisa Smith from the PSC? Okay, I don't see any. We're gonna go, Mr. Comer, were you here just for questions, or did you yourself have testimony? Oh, unmute yourself. You're still mute. Go on. Okay, we can't hear you. Unmute yourself, and hopefully we can hear you. No, we can't.
I think he was here as extra.
Yeah, is he just here for backup, Lisa? Or-
Yes, he was here in case the members wanted to ask any specific questions about the Transportation Division. So you can just ask me, and I can.
Okay, well, we
try to
can,
answer.
okay, any questions for what would have been Mr. Comer if he was unmuted, and then we can get back to the members. Any questions? Okay, I don't believe I see any, and therefore that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 429. And we will then move to the third and final bill from Chair Kelly from the PSC, Senate Bill 430, Madam Chair.
Thank you. This bill is entitled Public Service Commission Virtual Public Hearings. Given the current pandemic, it's still vitally important that the public is able to access information readily, especially if it involves raising utility rates. Senate Bill 430 is an emergency bill authorizing the Public Service Commission to conduct meetings virtually when discussing rate increases and certificates of public convenience and necessity, CPCN. Prior to the pandemic, the Maryland Public Service Commission conducted in-person hearings. However, since the pandemic began, the commission transitioned to holding fully virtual proceedings, including public hearings. Meetings are broadcast live on YouTube, and the public also has the ability to view meetings at a later date and time through archived footage. Conducting meetings this way potentially helps increase the number of people aware of what's happening by the ability to view hearings from the convenience of their homes. Senate Bill 430 requires the Public Service Commission to prominently display notice of utility rate increase hearings via its website, thereby giving the public ample time to comment and respond. The Public Service Commission is currently holding public comment hearings virtually under an executive order due to the pandemic. Senate Bill 430 has no effect until after the expiration of the temporary authority, and more than likely will go into effect no earlier than fiscal year 2022. The Public Service Commission says that holding virtual hearings reduces expenditures associated with travel to and from in-person hearings and saves time. I therefore ask for your support for Senate Bill 430.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before we go back to Lisa Smith, any questions for Chair Kelly? Okay, seeing none. Ms. Smith, you are the star witness of the day, and you get 5 minutes. You're the only witness signed up on this bill.
Thank you, Vice Chair Feldman, again, and thank you for all of the members' time. Thank you, Chair Kelly, again. This bill, Senate Bill 430, is also a clarifying bill. As Chair Kelly stated, the Public Service Commission has been holding virtual public comment hearings in proceedings, including rate cases and in certificate of public convenience and necessity cases. And we have been doing that under the authority of the governor. And this bill will simply give the commission the ability to do that moving forward, whether or not there are those orders in place. I would like to note that this bill does not remove the potential for the commission and the public utility law judges to hold hearings in person if appropriate, which may very well be appropriate after it's safe for us all to be together again. Let's see, the notice requirements that are in the law now still stand. And then as Chair Kelly stated, there will be additional notice requirements about posting the information prominently on the commission website. And then all of the normal notice and participation provisions apply. So folks will be able to request, make it known that they want to have an in-person hearing. And that's something that could be considered on a case-by-case basis when appropriate. But we have been working really hard to make sure that it is easy to participate virtually. If members of the public do not have the ability to participate on video conference easily, we've provided 1-800 numbers, and the commission has worked closely with the Office of People Counsel to make sure that that is accessible, and we're trying to make it as low cost as possible so it doesn't affect ratepayers. So that's all I really have on this bill. But again, we urge a favorable vote, and we thank you very much for your consideration. And I'm here if you have any questions at all on this or anything you'd like to ask me while I'm here today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Any questions for Ms. Smith? Okay, I do not see any. Therefore, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 430. Madam Chair, I'm going to send it back to you for the next bill.
Okay, thank you. The next bill is Senate Bill 286, which is being heard jointly with Budget and Tax. And Senator Griffith is here representing Budget and Tax online. So if there are questions that deal with that aspect, we might refer to Senator Griffith to help us with the answers. And feel free, if you think we are getting it wrong, to butt in and raise your hand and let us know. Okay, Senator Augustine, the bill is Behavioral Health Crisis Response Services Modifications.
Thank you, Chair Kelly. This is Senator Malcolm Augustine here presenting Senate Bill 286, Behavioral Health Crisis Response Services. Colleagues, I just wanted to share with you that Senator Carter came to us earlier talking about issues where we have law enforcement involved with people who are having a behavioral health crisis. And I just wanted to share with you all that last year, not in our committee, but in JPR, I put forward a bill that was for a Crisis Intervention Team Center of Excellence that was set to help with the training of law enforcement when they were called into a situation where someone was suffering from a mental health crisis. And this bill is really the next iteration of that bill. And it looks to address some of the things that came up in the bill that we heard earlier, including the fact that 1 in 5 adults in the United States struggle with mental health issues, and that the rate of mental health and substance abuse related to emergency department visits has increased 45% from 2006 to 2014, with suicidal ideation growing the most at an astounding 400% increase in visits. People in mental health crisis frequently encounter police rather than get medical attention, resulting in 44% of the people incarcerated in jails and 37% of people in state and federal prisons having a history of mental illness. And this bill aims to reduce those interactions toward better outcomes when someone is in the midst of a behavioral health crisis. We want to make sure that they are receiving the appropriate crisis, which can be the difference between life and death for individuals with a serious mental illness. As Senator Carter earlier today, nearly 1 in 4 people killed by police officers has had a mental health condition. The modifications proposed in Senate Bill 286 to the Behavioral Health Crisis Response Service Program will help mitigate this crisis. Just as a way by background, in 2018, the Maryland Behavioral Health Crisis Response Grant Program was created to provide funds to local governments to help establish and expand local crisis services, including mobile crisis services, walk-in crisis services, crisis residential beds, and other behavioral health crisis programs and services. Through this grant program, the Behavioral Health Administration has funded a number of local programs like increased staffing for walk-in crisis centers, expansion of existing mobile services to be 24 hours instead of just overnight, and for expansion of crisis services to include substance use peer support, navigation, and urgent psychiatric appointments. Now, the funding began for this program in FY 2020, and it was $3 million, and it's increased by an additional $1 million per year until the program is set to end in FY 2022. Now, what this legislation does is it builds on the existing Behavioral Health Crisis Response Grant Program by increasing the funding for the program and eliminating the FY 22 program cutoff. The increase from FY 22 starts at $5 million and increases to $8 million in FY 2023, $9 million in FY 2024, and in 2025, the crisis response grants cap off at $10 million per year, and funding would continue thereafter. This would obviously encourage local governments to invest in mobile crisis teams that would then minimize the role of law enforcement in crisis interactions, make sure that when they are doing so that they are culturally competent, and that they will work with the local communities to evaluate and troubleshoot service delivery issues, in part by engaging with local advocacy groups. And following stabilization, ensure that individuals have appropriate follow-up care and support utilizing peers. This bill also urges the BHA to solicit feedback on these programs in a wide variety of ways to ensure maximum participation from communities, which have historically had difficulty accessing care. In this bill, a mobile crisis team is further defined to ensure local governments are investing in a comprehensive program equipped to address Marylanders in crisis 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So why are these changes so necessary? Well, one, and you heard this earlier, and I heard the focus on this, we want to minimize the role of law enforcement in a behavioral health crisis. Now, nationwide, we've had protests over police accountability, racial justice, and re-energize long-standing efforts to fundamentally change how police departments respond to someone in a mental health emergency. Many are calling for removing or dramatically reducing law enforcement's role in responding to those crises calls unless absolutely necessary. So sometimes there are situations where there is a role for law enforcement. Now, but since 2015, nearly a quarter, as we talked about earlier, of the folks who have been suffering with these mental health illnesses are the ones who have passed away. And so what we also know is that this has been worse during the pandemic. And so we know that people have been suffering even more with isolation. And then when they find it, they get triggered by the police, as we heard earlier, those issues are made even worse. Now, so the mobile crisis units or teams, whichever one that you want to use, are designed to respond rapidly to individuals experiencing that crisis. And they include emergency mental health evaluations performed by a clinician who can help stabilize, determine the right place for an individual to be stabilized. Connections to community-based services and additional follow-up and support should follow an initial response. The goal of the legislation is to incentivize more careful integration of the mental health care system. Many of the jurisdictions in Maryland have done a lot to train their officers, as I talked about, on de-escalation, responding or call to an appropriate response to an individual in crisis. But training doesn't address the overall lack of systemic crisis response. Now, another element of this legislation is cultural competence. So cultural competence has gained attention, particularly in healthcare, from policymakers, providers, insurers, and educators as a strategy to improve quality and eliminate racial and ethnic disparities in healthcare. The goal of cultural competence is to create a healthcare system and workforce that are capable of delivering the highest quality care to every patient, regardless of race, ethnicity, culture, or language proficiency. Bringing this to fruition requires action by various healthcare sectors, each with different motivations, approaches, and leverage points for advancing in this field. Maryland is a very diverse state. And so we know that we want to make sure that when we're addressing someone, we're doing it in a culturally responsive way. That they have people who know how to interact with the folks that are before them, because we have so many different folks in Maryland from all different types of cultures, throughout the state. So cultural competence is a way to increase the access to quality of care for those patient populations, especially populations which often, find it difficult to get that timely, high quality care because of these linguistic and cultural barriers. And we know that it just one size just doesn't fit all. And so we know that particularly with our very diverse patient population. Now, the third thing that this bill does is it really emphasizes community collaboration and accessible, making sure outreach to that community in that collaboration. So there are a bunch of bills this session aimed at reducing racial health disparities. This provision in this bill is part of that ongoing effort, requiring the Behavioral Health Administration to solicit feedback about the Behavioral Health Crisis Grants Response Program in a variety of formats. Public comment, town halls, surveys, other methods that will help create additional and traditional and non-traditional engagement with the government. Successful crisis response programs understand the needs of their immediate communities and should be resourced appropriately. One size fits all approach fails to acknowledge the difference in needs and improvement will only come from direct conversations with the community that is set to serve. So local behavioral health authorities, patients, consumer advocate groups, support groups, providers, law enforcement, municipal government, county government, individuals experiencing crisis and their family members, all important voices in evaluating the efficacy of these grants and holding service providers and the state accountable on reaching out to these communities. Colleagues, this is a bill that strengthens and invests in mobile crisis units while reducing law enforcement interaction with Maryland behavioral health crisis. And I ask for a favorable report.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, well, we're going next to the proponent who is the lead proponent and who will have 5 minutes. Other proponents and opponents will have 2.5. So we'll start with Adrienne Bresdenstein.
Chair Kelly, and thank you to members of the committee. I'm Adrienne Bridenstine. I'm with Behavioral Health System Baltimore. Thank you, Senator Augustine, for introducing this really important bill. We are here in strong support of SB 286. For those who don't know us, Behavioral Health System Baltimore is the local behavioral health authority in Baltimore City and is a recipient of some of the grant funds that have come through this grant program in the past. We have used these grant funding to support our community-based mobile crisis teams to bring them to be 24/7. So we can now have 24/7 response in Baltimore City. However, it is not nearly at the capacity it needs to be to truly achieve the goals that the senators outlined of this legislation, which is to reduce police interaction when you're responding to behavioral health crises. We know in the city from doing a gaps analysis of our public behavioral health system that our 911 call center receives over 13,000 behavioral health crisis calls annually. We know that a significant portion of these can be and should be diverted to mobile crisis teams and not have a law enforcement response. So that is why we're here in strong support of this bill. We really love the language that has been crafted that specifically calls to minimize law enforcement involvement and are very supportive of increasing the grant funding for mobile crisis services, because we do believe if there is more robust mobile crisis services that we could better respond to meet people's needs in the community at the time that they need it. So thank you for hearing my testimony today, and I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this witness? Let me just say before I call the next witness that Senator Griffith, considering the hefty fiscal note for this good bill, if you have questions that would help to inform us of the considerations that budget and tax will need to give to the legislation, bring them up so that we can be aware as we consider. Okay.
Yeah,
so
thank you, Madam Chair. I'm actually listening just to make sure I get my arms around the concepts of the bill. And I'm up next in EHE presenting 2 bills. And they've
Okay.
been texting me, telling me to show up on camera. So
Okay.
the hearing, I will reach out to the sponsor and connect with your witnesses, Mr. Sponsor, if that's all right, offline.
That'll be fine.
I likely do have some questions.
Okay. All right. We're going now to Latesha Higgs.
Good morning. I'm sorry. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Letitia Higgs, and I favor this bill because twice I experienced a mental health crisis in which the police were called. My first crisis occurred in 1998, a few months after giving birth to my first child. I felt suicidal and confided to a family member that I wanted to die. I locked myself in the bathroom with my baby and cried some of the most painful tears that day. I was tired and desperately needed comfort and help. The police was called and they asked me to unlock the door, which I did. Then they took my baby and handcuffed me behind my back. As they escorted me out of my home and into the back of the squad car, I was afraid and confused. Though I have never committed a crime, that day I felt like a criminal. That day I needed a listening ear, help, and understanding. Instead, handcuffs, shame, and embarrassment screamed the message that mental health was criminal. In 2012, when I was officially diagnosed with a mood disorder, it should come as no surprise that I did not take my diagnosis seriously, nor follow through consistently with my treatment plan. As a result, I was hospitalized several more times and lost my family in the process. Refusing to accept my diagnosis simply because I believed that it was criminal, it even caused me major problems on the job. 2014 was the second and last time the police was called during a mental health crisis. This time, a crisis response team accompanied them. They talked with me, listened to me, and showed me compassion. I was not handcuffed nor escorted out of my home. I felt valued and heard. My experience with the crisis response team helped me to see that mental illness is not criminal. I realized that it's an illness that I can experience recovery if I took it and my treatment plan seriously, and I did. Since 2014, I have not been hospitalized, managed to launch my own nonprofit, and speak before many as a mental health speaker and advocate. I'm also an educator. I come before you very thankful for a crisis response team who treated me with dignity and not like a criminal. Thank you.
Thank you. Very powerful testimony. All right, Senator Benson. Unmute yourself, Senator.
Thank you. I'm going to also suggest, Madam Chair, that Senator Augustine get with Senator Carter, since their bills are very similar, and work with Senator Griffin so that we could come up with a real comprehensive good bill. Because I just have to tell you all that this matter that we're discussing at this point in time is extremely serious. I could cite a case here that's a tearjerker, but I want you all to know that I deeply and profoundly appreciate this bill being put in by Senator Augustine.
Thank you. All right, we're going next to Mary Pizzo.
Michelle, number 4.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry,
Michelle Lipskin.
All right, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
Michelle.
Hi.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair Kelly, Vice Chair Feldman, and committee members for your hard work to improve the quality of healthcare services for Marylanders. And thank you so much, Senator Augustine and Adrian, for giving me the opportunity to speak here today. My name is Michelle Lifshin, and I'm here today with Honor Own of Maryland. We're the oldest, largest peer-operated behavioral health advocacy organization in the nation. Our network consists of 23 affiliated community-based peer centers that offer immediate voluntary recovery services to those with behavioral health challenges, many of whom are experiencing homelessness or are uninsured. We're in strong support of Senate Bill 286. The stress, social disruption, and economic hardship caused by COVID-19 mean that comprehensive crisis services are needed now more than ever before. It's essential that we increase and prioritize funding for mobile crisis and alternative community-based crisis services that can both rapidly and expertly connect individuals to the best suited, trauma-informed, and recovery-oriented care they need. For decades, our network has witnessed the power and benefit that a community-oriented approach based in mutual support and trust has had in healing and empowering individuals toward their recovery. Many of our peer centers have formed strong relationships with local mobile crisis teams and CIT trained officers. Our center director in Carroll County often receives calls from those teams to assist with de-escalation, coordinating resources such as shelter or food, and accessing behavioral health services. As an example, one of our centers received a call from the local mobile crisis team about a woman they were with who had just been raped and had nowhere to stay or go. It was winter and she only had on a tank top. Our center was able to get her clothing and a safe space to stay while mobile crisis worked through their clinical protocols. In other situations, our centers have been able to help coordinate essential resources such as shelter, food, peer support, and access to behavioral health services for individuals who would have otherwise been placed in jail or a hospital in response to a crisis call, solely because they had nowhere else for them to go. Having more mobile crisis teams and strengthening walk-in services like our peer centers and community-based crisis services will ensure the behavioral health system maintains a truly person-centered and recovery-oriented response to crisis. We urge you to vote in favor of this essential bill. Thank you.
Thank you. And before I go to the last oral witness, I'd like to just say I've been sitting here counting. I see that there are 23 other individuals and organizations signed up in favor of this bill. So guys, look at your written testimony also. Okay, we're going finally. Okay, the last one isn't here, but there are a lot of people, including the Health Education Unit of the Office of the Attorney General, MedChi, Morphe, Disability Rights Maryland, Maryland Hospital Association, MACO, all in favor of this bill. Okay, and there are no opponents. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, that's the testimony on that one. And we're going finally to Senate Bill 238, Senator Kramer.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. Ben Kramer here to introduce Senate Bill 238. I'm not going to ask you to actually raise your hands, but how many members of this committee, when opening a bank account, read the fine print on the signature card that you sign when you open that bank account? And then the next question is, those bank signature cards make reference to rules and regulations of the bank where you're opening the bank account that can only be found online. How many of you have, for instance, gone to take a look at the nearly 60 pages of exceedingly fine print that SunTrust Bank, now called Truist Bank, has, where you can only find it online? The details of what you've committed to when you open that checking or savings account. I am speculating that very few on this committee have ever done that, and that very few of your constituents have ever done so. Which then begs the next question. How many of you believe that when your money is in your checking or savings deposit, that the bank has a liability to protect those funds, so that if the bank is hacked and those funds are stolen, that you are not liable, that the bank would be liable because the money's sitting there in the bank, not under your mattress? Well, if you believe that the bank has liability, I think you will be very interested as I detail the purpose of this bill, because that's what I thought But I learned a lesson the hard way over the course of this summer that the banks have actually very, very limited liability at all, and therefore no incentive to protect your money in their banks, or the money of your constituents, or the money of our small business owners throughout the state. In fact, if you're an individual, you may have up to 60 days protection if you quickly notify the bank when you receive your bank statement. Now, I am pretty darn good about monitoring bank statements, but I guarantee you there are a whole lot of our constituents who get their bank statements and they say, I'll get to it when I get a chance. If they do not get to it very quickly, they become liable for money that is lost because they failed to notify the bank that that money was taken out of their account. Now, I personally, I don't do any electronic banking, period. There's a reason for that. I figure the more opportunity for electronic hacking comes with the greater opportunity with electronic banking. I don't bank electronically. Having said that, my account was electronically hacked at SunTrust Bank, and the funds in that account were stolen. I learned from SunTrust Bank, now Truist, and that's the way all my correspondence with them went. It's, well, we here at SunTrust Bank, now Truist, have no obligation or responsibility to you, because it turns out if it is a business account, you have what is known as the 24-hour rule to notify the bank within 24 hours of that money being electronically stolen, or the bank doesn't have liability for the stolen money, despite the fact it's not an electronic banking account. It is so blatantly obvious that even First Business Bank, I found online, has the following information on it. The burden is on the business to notify the bank immediately if there is a disputed transaction within, and great big bold print, 24 hours, all the liability for fraudulent transactions shifts from the bank to the business. As a result, First Business Bank recommends you reconcile your accounts and review online activity daily. Otherwise, the bank has no liability. Now, how many of our mom and pop businesses have the opportunity or even the knowledge and understanding to know that they have to be checking their banking accounts every single day? They have to be on constant watch because the banks have no liability. And my good friends from the Maryland Bankers Association will be here with, and I love them dearly. I love Bob Enton. I love Mindy Lehman. Don't get me wrong. But they're going to come here and try to go, throw smoke and mirrors and tell you, oh, there's this federal regulation and there's that federal regulation and we're so heavily governed. The fact of the matter is they are not. And so we have an obligation, I believe, to maybe shift a little of this responsibility back to the source of the problem, because here's the bottom line. what is the incentive of the banks to protect your money, either as a consumer or as a small business owner, if they have no liability under the federal regulations right now? I would proffer to you that there is no incentive. And that's why our friends from the banks and the credit unions are going to be here in total opposition to this. And that then begs the question, with what frequency are these accounts being hacked that they are this adamantly opposed to this bill? Because the bill shifts, and I would say in a very balanced way, some of that responsibility back to the bank. So let's quickly go through what the bill does. The bill provides that a consumer, and under the terms of this bill, that's either a personal bank account or a business bank account, because our small business owners, who many of us profess to care about and want to protect, are the ones who are being harmed with the status quo. So under this bill, a consumer may not be held liable for an unauthorized debit transaction, that's basically money stolen from their account, if the consumer notifies the banking institution within 90 days after receipt of the periodic statement that shows the unauthorized debit transaction. Now, for our homeowners and residents, that means when they get their bank statement, if it's sent either electronically at the end of the month or through the mail at the end of the month, they will have 90 days from the date that that is sent to go through it and say, hey, wait a minute, there's $10,000 that's been taken out of my account. This isn't me. I didn't authorize this. And go to the bank and make a claim to say, this was not my transaction, and I want my money returned to me. If the individual fails to notify the bank within that 90 days, so we're putting some responsibility on the consumer to say, I've got a job to do. I need to be checking my bank statements. But if they fail to do it within that 90-day period, then anything after that 90 days that the bank can show they would have stopped the embezzling, the theft, the stealing, whatever it may be, then if they had only known about it, then after that 90 days, the bank is free of liability for funds that keep getting stolen beyond that 90 days if the individual does not provide them with notice. Now, currently under federal regulations, an individual may have up to 60 days to do just what I said here. We're changing that and putting in state law 90 days. Because I think it's appropriate to give our residents the opportunity to find their money's been stolen from the bank and then give them a reasonable amount of time to notify the bank and be protected from the theft. If you're a small business owner, you will now also have this 90 days as opposed to 24 hours. And once again, how many of the dry cleaners here, how many of the dress shops on Main Street, how many of the nail salons, how many of the beer and wine stores, the retail mom and pop stores, how many of them to begin with? The law says you've got 24 hours if money's stolen from your account. And if you don't let the bank know, kiss it goodbye. But they also should have more than 24 hours for this to be reported. So they too will have this same 90-day period where then they do become responsible. So it's not banks, all the liability shifting to you, although when I've discussed this with some of my colleagues here, they have expressed surprise as to why shouldn't the banks be fully responsible for theft from their banks? It's a legitimate question, but that's not what this bill does. So next, the bill provides that during a state of emergency, they may not be held liable at all for an unauthorized transaction. Why would we do that? Because right now, we had both residents and small business owners who are in lockdown in their homes during this pandemic. Small business owners who weren't even allowed to go to their business if they were not essential. They were required to stay home. Their business mail was going to the business and piling up, but they weren't going there to their business to see what was in that mail. So during a pandemic, when people are in lockdown, the banks better up their game to protect the funds that they invest, that they earn interest on, that they loan out to make money on. But if it's stolen from them, that's not our money. That was your money that was stolen. That's a problem. It requires a reporting provision because right now, we have no idea how often this is going on, folks, but it must be happening enough that the banks are here in absolute and total opposition to this consumer-friendly legislation because they don't want to have to cover their losses for their failures. Otherwise, they wouldn't be here fighting this like they're going to be. It also requires that on the notice, the bank statement, on the outside of the envelope, there will now be a requirement to put on it, hey, look at your bank statement immediately, because if you've had money stolen, you need to let us know right away, or you may lose your money. Because people don't realize right now, if their account is hacked and that money is stolen through no fault of their own, if they don't pick it up on that bank statement right away, their money could well be gone. Well be gone. So let's at least let them know that, hey, there is some responsibility that you have, or you may lose your money if it's been stolen from the bank. Finally, every one of these accounts includes a waiver of jury trial and binding arbitration. Who does that favor? The banks every time. Binding arbitration is more complex, far more expensive, and how often does a consumer go to arbitrators to have a decision rendered? Very infrequently, maybe once. The banks are in there all the time. So who do you think arbitrators favor at the end of the day? If they want to make money and be chosen as arbitrators, they know where their bread is buttered. And the banks have binding arbitration. This bill can't touch that. That's federal regs. But if your money's stolen, you want to try to sue them to get it back, you can't. You have to go to binding arbitration. They also prohibit no class action lawsuits in every one of their rules and regulations. I don't care which bank you go to, they've got the same lawyers who have prepared the same documents. So now, if it's happened to thousands of people who have been hacked, you can't get together with them and file suit to try to change the habits because there's no class action lawsuits permitted in the bank documents. I noticed in their opposition that my friends at the Maryland Bankers Association state that there's 182 billion with a B, $182 billion in deposits in Maryland bank accounts, Maryland bank accounts. Now, if your constituents' money is stolen through no fault of their own from one of these banks, do you think your constituent should lose what could be their life's savings because the bank failed to protect it? Or how about if that $182 billion and what about their profits covers those losses? I would proffer to you that the banks are in a far stronger position and might actually take greater action if there's incentive for them to protect our constituents' money. That simply does not exist right now. Finally, I would say that the bill unintentionally left out credit unions. That will be addressed in an amendment to ensure that credit unions are also liable up to a point for funds that are stolen from their credit unions, and rightfully so that at the end of the day, colleagues, are we going to protect our consumers, our residents, and our small business owners? Or are we going to back the play of the banks on this and say, oh no, we don't dare touch anything that governs the banks? But I'll tell you right now, federal regulations, despite what you're going to hear, are terribly inadequate. And I believe we have a responsibility. And I will share with you that SunTrust Bank, now Truist, which steadfastly refused to replace the funds that were electronically hacked and stolen from my account, the entity that did receive them, which was a brokerage firm with no obligation to me whatsoever, did return the funds because they were hacked and then tucked away into this brokerage firm in an account. The brokerage firm found those funds and restored them to me with no obligation or responsibility whatsoever. But SunTrust Bank steadfastly refused to replace those stolen funds. So that's what this bill is about. Let's at least balance the equation a little bit to ensure that our small business owners and our residents are protected if their money's stolen from a bank through no fault of their own. With that, I certainly welcome any questions, Madam Chair.
Okay, I do have one. I'm noticing that one condition in your bill that I don't think you've spoken to today would extend the 90-day period that you're asking for, even longer if the customer whose bank account was hacked into had extenuating circumstances such as hospitalization or extended travel. So you want the bank to be liable for not being notified after they send you a statement for 90 days normally, and for more than 90 days, I don't know how much more, if after they've sent you a statement, you don't tell them this, I didn't do this, my bank account is hacked, and you're on something like extended travel. Don't you think that's asking a bit much? And what about if, well, you're adding in credit unions even?
Well, there's two parts to
What
that.
responsibility should the customer have if I receive my statement and it shows that something wrong has gone on in the account? You say it's 60 days now that you have.
Madam Chair, that language comes straight out of existing federal language. So that exists right now in place in federal regulations. The purpose for it is that if someone is traveling or hospitalized and they do not have access to their statements, that there is this extenuating circumstances clause. This has been, there is a significant case law now on this issue because this language currently exists in federal regulations. I took it verbatim out of the federal regs to enshrine it in our state law as well, because I thought it made a lot of sense and I understand why federal regulators did it. So I thought it appropriate to extend it into our state law as well. Whether it were stricken from this bill or not, it exists. So
okay, but we know you're upset, and if they had hacked into my account, I would be upset. But I'm just trying to understand the bill. How much?
No upset, Madam Chair. Look, if the bottom line, if this was about Ben Kramer being upset, I was made whole, not by the institution that allowed the money to be stolen, but I was made whole. What I have learned from this is that I could walk away from it, wash my hands and be done, or I have seen a gaping hole in consumer protections in quite, frankly, across our nation.
Okay, but let me ask.
And I will share with you, Madam Chair, let me.
You've done a great job. I'd like to just ask the question if I could.
That's fine.
I'm just trying to understand if what you're telling me, and I'm looking on page 3, lines 16 through 18 of the bill.
Yes.
That after I've been hacked, my account was at your bank. If I haven't notified the bank within 90 days, it's really long, that there's something wrong, that my account isn't right. I don't think most people would expect the bank to know if you don't tell them that I didn't do what my account shows I did. But when you say that they should extend the 90-day period, you don't say to what. And that seems ad infinitum, because maybe I was on extended travel.
And that's my point, Madam Chair.
Am I understanding your bill? I'm trying to understand.
Yes, and I will reiterate that once again, this language comes straight out of existing federal law. And there is case law surrounding what those extenuating circumstances may be and the length of time that it may be. Now, I would have no problem if the committee took a look at that line and said, we think that maybe it's not definitive enough. We can strike it because these protections are offered under federal regulations at the moment. I thought it made sense. I understand, because I've read a lot of the case law on this issue. I understand the logic and the definitions that the courts have put in place around this particular issue, that one line. And I thought it made good sense to incorporate it, but it would not hurt my feelings were that line to be stricken from the bill.
Well, let me just ask you about one other component. And that was for the information that you want to be on the outside of the mailing envelope. Aren't you afraid? I mean, well, in the first place, they need a huge envelope to put in a thing that extensive. But I wouldn't want other hackers who are looking for vulnerable people to know that I've already been hacked. In a way, it's like the bank is telling you about your business on the outside of the envelope rather than inside. Couldn't they be sued for doing that?
Madam Chair, there's nothing in this cautionary statement, which is utilized throughout Maryland law elsewhere, where we do have these kinds of cautionary statements. There is nothing in there that indicates you've been hacked or any information about your having been hacked, or it simply is a notice that you need to let's take a look at exactly what it's.
Check this statement immediately for unauthorized debit transactions on your account. You're gonna put all this
Correct.
on the outside of.
Madam
You,
Chair,
you would alert some,
would
some
you
other
share
people
with
who.
me, Madam Chair, would you share with me how you believe there's a better way to communicate to your constituents that if they do not timely open that envelope and do a reconciliation, and Madam Chair, what your practices may be, I can assure you may be very different than the rest of our constituents in the state, because very few of them know that if they don't quickly reconcile their bank statements, that money could be gone. This is nothing more than a notification.
Oh, okay.
Yes, take a look at it.
Well, I was just asking. Senator Bottle has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and my question's for the sponsor of the bill. Thank you, Senator Kramer. I'm a little confused reading the bill because you keep referring to consumer, and the consumer's addressed in Reg E. So your issue was with a business account, not a consumer account, right? Am I correct?
Under the definition on the bill itself, if you look at consumer, and I preface this in my comments, consumer means a person that holds a business or personal checking or savings account with a banking institution in the state. So
I read the bill, Senator Kramer, but
okay.
My question is, it's confusing when you read Reg E, which is the federal banking regulations that actually refer to consumer accounts, doesn't refer to business accounts. So I'm very concerned about that definition. My other question is, banking regulation is done federally because you have banks that big banks like Bank of America and Wells Fargo that are in every state in the country, but you even have small community banks that cross state lines. You know, they may go from Maryland into Pennsylvania, Maryland into Delaware, Maryland into Virginia, Maryland into West Virginia. You're proposing regulations just for Maryland. And I think it's going to cause a problem with the banks that are in multiple states. Just a comment.
Well, and I will share with you that other states have begun to enter this arena because federal regulators have refused to do so. So there are other states right now beginning to address this very issue in this particular area of the law because federal regulators have not. And this is an arena where states absolutely can, begin to regulate and involve state regulations. And in fact, I had a great conversation with a national expert on this who said, congratulations, you've discovered what so many other states are now starting to pick up. Federal regulators aren't touching this issue, and it's not going to happen unless it happens at the state.
Can you share us some of the legislation from other states, please? That would be very helpful.
I have not researched what other states are doing. I know other states are getting involved just from what I have been reading online. I have not focused on other states. I focused on what I thought was an appropriate way to address it in Maryland. But
maybe the bankers on the call can help us with some other states' regulation. Thank you, Senator Kramer.
Okay, are there other questions for the sponsor? Okay, if not, then we're going next to number 2, which has the 5 minutes, the Maryland Retailers Association and the Maryland food industry. This is Kaylee Locklear.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and honorable members of the Finance Committee. For the record, Kaylee Locklear here on behalf of the Maryland Retailers Association in support of this legislation. So I have to tell the committee that when I brought this bill to the attention of our legislative committee and then started talking to our smaller businesses, there honestly was initial outright kind of denial around this. This can't be true. And they were really confused. And so that led to members kind of checking what their individual bank policies were, because they do differ. And then we started looking into the federal law as well as Maryland law that the sponsor referenced earlier. And the conversation kind of turned into disbelief because they all truly thought that this already was the law and these protections were in place. And we talk about this all the time in this committee, but small business owners really do it all, right? They're the cashier, they're the IT department, they're the HR department. They make any and all repairs at their place of business. They handle finances and so much more. And many communicated to me that they really aren't checking their account on a daily basis. So compound that with, say, a global pandemic that shut businesses down for months, or even a couple day-long snowstorm where they have absolutely no reason to check their account because they are flat out closed. And then I think we begin to see where there are situations where notification in 24 hours won't happen, or it just isn't possible. Finally, I would point out that there are still businesses that do just some online banking. And you heard earlier from Senator Kramer, some truly don't do online banking. And the fact that a bank statement goes out only once a month sets those businesses in particular up to fail, as they're not going to catch a fraudulent transaction in 24 hours. We do recognize the longer notification takes on our end or a business's end, the longer it's going to take a bank to recover the money. But the other side of that is that businesses are relying and trusting banks to protect their finances. We look forward to working with the committee on this bill and the stakeholders, and I'm glad to answer any questions. Thank you.
So if I understand, so you're saying 60 days wouldn't be long enough for the typical small business owner to notice with 2 successive notifications from a bank that that they see something that's wrong, that they ought to talk to the bank about?
Which is the way that the bill is written. Obviously, if somebody isn't doing online banking, you are not going to catch a fraudulent transaction in 24 hours. And that is something that Senator Kramer, I think, is trying to address here and look to federal law to help guide us here, because there are, for consumers, some of these timeframes in place. But he's trying to make sure that there's coverage. So in these periods of time where somebody's not paying close attention, that they're covered.
Okay, and I'm trying to be clear though. I thought what he was doing was moving from 60 days as the amount of time that the bank has now
90.
for you to notice that there's something wrong on the statements, to 90 days for the customer to notice there's something wrong on the statement.
Yeah, and the difference is at the federal level, that's just for consumers. That isn't regulating business. So we have 24 hours to make that notification. That's the difference that's going on here too. And that definition of consumer at the federal level is just a consumer. The definition in this bill covers a business and a consumer.
Okay. All right, let's go to the next. In fact, or everybody else is, okay. All right, let's go to Robert Enton.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Robert Enton on behalf of the Maryland Bankers Association. We are very, very, very strongly opposed to this legislation. You know, our banks are made up of banks that do business in every state in the country. We have regional banks that maybe do banking on the entire Eastern Seaboard. And we have, as was stated by Senator Bidel, we have many small community banks that may go over from, say, Cecil County, that bank have branches and operate in Delaware. We have First United Bank out in Garrett County that has branches and operates in West Virginia. We have many of our small community banks that border the state of Virginia that also have branches and operate in Virginia. The reason that the federal government regulates banking the way that it does is to have a consistent set of regulations that apply across the country, regardless of where the bank does business. And that's what Regulation E does. Now, I will tell you that it's correct that Regulation E is a consumer law. And if there needs to be a change to Regulation E to extend it to businesses, we really truly believe that that's something that has to happen at the federal level. I can tell you categorically that no other state in the country has enacted anything even remotely like the provisions that are in this bill. I can also tell you categorically that we surveyed our banks, and banks have different policies for business accounts. Some banks have a policy that maybe has 5 days. Some banks treat businesses the same way that Reg E does. Maybe it's 60 days. But I can tell you that every bank does everything that it possibly can to recover this money for its customer and to keep that customer with that bank. The notion that the way the bill is written, that I don't know, a Xerox or IBM or Amazon would be treated, would be covered by this bill. It says any business would be covered by the bill. It's just, frankly, really unheard of. I know that Senator Kramer, and he discussed this with me, but I was not able to discuss it at all with his bank because that bank was prohibited by law from discussing anything with me whatsoever. But he did talk to me about it. And I do know, I'm not familiar with the circumstances as to how he got his money back, but he got every single penny back that had been taken out of his account. I don't know whether it came from this, from some corporation overseas, a brokerage house, or if it came from their bank. Throughout the banking system, when there are transfers from one bank to another bank, to another bank, to another bank, there's liability between those institutions when there's a loss. But the bottom line is that he did get all of his money back. Reg E has extensive consumer protections. When you look at the bill itself, the bill basically says if you notify them within 90 days, then they're not responsible for any funds that are taken after the 90 days. If you're a business. I don't believe that that's not the way that this should work, particularly for a business account. I'm sorry, but businesses, have a responsibility. They're businesses to look at their accounts and to track what's in them. A lot of the banking is done online now. There's some that isn't done online, but every agreement with a bank and every statement with a bank has a provision that spells out exactly what the liabilities and responsibilities are of the bank and what the liabilities and responsibilities are of the customer. And I apologize if these agreements can be very lengthy, but that's because of the extent to which the banking industry is regulated way, way beyond what any other industry is regulated. We're regulated at the state level. We're regulated at the federal level. And I think if this is something that needs to be addressed, we strongly believe that it needs to be addressed at the federal level, and not to have a law on the books in the state of Maryland that is going to create problems, not just for our banks that have a national or regional footprint, but for our community banks as well. I will also point out that the Maryland Uniform Commercial Code in section 4-406 deals with the issue of unauthorized transfers from an account, and specifically provides that if the bank sender makes a statement of account of items pursuant to subsection A, the customer must exercise reasonable promptness in examining the statement of the items to determine whether the payment was not authorized, and places responsibilities both on the bank and on the customer. And that's part of the Uniform Commercial Code, which once again is in effect in pretty much every single state in the country. I would just say that I feel bad about what happened to Senator Kramer. He is a good friend of mine, and I feel bad about it. He did talk to me about it, but I was so thrilled to find out, and it was a large sum. He told me the sum, that he got his money back. And it wasn't, I don't think, just something that happened independent of the efforts of the bank involved. The final thing I would say is I did have a conversation this morning with Ms. I'll wrap up with Ms. Locklear. And she told me that exactly what she said, that her members were alarmed to find out this was the law. But she also told me there wasn't one single member.
Mr. Enton.
Yes.
Your time's up. unless somebody else has a question.
Could I just finish this one
Yeah,
statement?
well,
That no member of her trade association has ever suffered a loss because of an unauthorized account to her knowledge. And that's because the banks go out of their way to make the depositor whole. So I'll close and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, we're going next to Mindy Lehman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, for the record, my name is Mindy Lehman, Senior Vice President of Government Relations and Communications for the Maryland Bankers Association. Mr. Enton's testimony did a great job of describing our position on the bill. You do have a copy of our written testimony, which also highlights the additional ways that account holders, both consumers and businesses, can set up additional notices and alarms for their convenience, alerts rather, not alarms, but alerts for their convenience to be notified about any unusual activity. So with that, happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Let me ask you about the idea in the bill of having a notice on the outside of the envelope about the nature of a problem with someone's account. Would that make sense?
Yeah, I would say this, Madam Chairman. You know, my envelope is like any
well,
other
you know what,
envelope.
Mr. Anton, right now you're on Ms. Lehman's time.
I'm sorry, but I just want to say that I don't know what else we could get on the front of the envelope if we have all that on there.
Oh, okay.
It's on the
Mindy,
statement.
did you have any response to that?
Yes, our members expressed the same concerns that you raised in terms of alerting people that aren't the account holder as to what the contents of that envelope might include. So they express the same concerns that you yourself raised.
Okay. Are there any other questions, colleagues? Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So now that we've had extensive discussion about the horrors of this information, cautioning people on the outside of the envelope to look at what's inside the envelope to find out if their account's been hacked. What if there was a notice contained inside the envelope providing the same cautionary information? Mr. Enton, would you be shocked and appalled at the notion of doing that?
You know, once again, I don't make the decisions for my client. I would certainly be happy to take that back to them.
So that's something we could quickly, no, Mr. Enton, come on. I just asked you that question and you said you'll go back.
Yes,
to
be happy to
discuss
take it back.
And it seems to me then we address all the concerns about there being too much information on the outside, yet we could still provide some assistance to our residents by alerting them to the need to look at it if we had a notice on the inside. Now, Mr. Enton, you made reference to the uniform commercial.
Wait a minute now, you're conducting interrogation now. At this point,
I'm asking questions, Madam Chair. You said, is it time? Anybody have questions? I have questions.
But you use your time. We gave you unlimited time right up front. I'm gonna give you one question. Come on.
Now, Madam Chair, if committee members are no longer permitted to ask questions of those who are speaking at a bill hearing, that's if that's the new rule, that's fine.
Well, we did ask if you had any other questions when you were following your testimony.
No, the people wanted, the question was, were there any questions of me at my testimony?
Okay.
Now I have heard testimony. And now, unless the rules have changed and committee members are not allowed to ask questions of those who have testified, I won't ask any questions.
I see.
Rules now, if nobody else is permitted to ask
questions. Go ahead and ask your question, Mr. Kramer.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the indulgence. Mr. Enton, you made reference to the Uniform Commercial Code and its protections. Are you aware that there is a provision in the Uniform Commercial Code that states the following? The rights and obligations of a party to a funds transfer may be varied by agreement of the affected parties. In other words, in those documents that we were discussing, the ones that you said maybe you can only find them online, pretty much every bank waives the standards of the UCC in those documents, so that anybody who opens a bank account and signs the signature card has waived those rights that you made reference to that the UCC provides. Is that not accurate?
Well, I would say this, Senator Kramer. Once again, the UCC is not going to trump over Reg E. And as to businesses, I'm looking at Section 4406 right now. Is that what you're referring to?
Article 4A. But let's not
Yes,
get.
I'm looking at Title 4. So perhaps maybe there's a conflict between 4406 and 4A. So I'll have to take a look at that and get back to you.
4A deals exclusively with electronic transfers, Mr. Enton. So
Right.
just want to get you up to speed on that. It's newer and updated because of electronic transfers. So it's
I'll certainly take a look at that, Senator.
than Article
Okay.
4. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll go to Rory Murray, the Maryland DC Credit Union Association.
Madam Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, my name is Rory Murray. I'm the Vice President of Advocacy with the Maryland and DC Credit Union Association. We represent the 77 credit unions and their 2.2 million members in the state of Maryland. Mr. Enton hit on more or less a lot of what we were going to say. I sent a very detailed testimony. I'm just going to hit on a couple high-level things. First, as we already know, consumer transactions are governed by Reg E. Reg E is extraordinarily complex. There's a reason why states don't alter it. It's 40 pages, it's 61,000 words, and the regulators themselves, if there needs to be an alteration to this, they tend to request the alteration to Congress. It doesn't come from private parties usually, and at the end of this, I'll get to the one time it did come from a private party and it didn't work out. Either way, the regulation itself, the examination procedures of the regulation, the supervisory procedures of the regulation are extraordinarily complex. So making small changes to these are not small changes because they affect many other pieces. If you look at the end of my testimony, there's an actual checklist straight out of the NCUA Examiner's Manual just on Reg E. To really talk about how complex all of this is, you can't just look at debit transactions in a vacuum. It's debit and credit transactions. And there's a whole bunch of laws that refer to both of them. They're both electronic, but they fall under different laws. To show how easily they can be confused, in this bill, it uses the language of extenuating circumstances such as extended travel or hospitalization. That is not a Reg E regulation. That is a TILA regulation, the Truth in Lending Act. That is a credit regulation, not a debit regulation. And those pop up constantly in the difference of these laws, but they all intersect. And if you ask Congress, there's reasons for all of it. So point one, it's extraordinarily complex. That's why it stays federal. That's why we'd like it to stay federal. Second, if there is what Regulation E does say, if you look at 12 CFR 1005.6b4, if there are any extenuating circumstances, the institution can extend any of these dates at once, for as long as it wants. It says it uses the term reasonable period. The goal there goes kind of back to free market principles. The consumer and the financial institution will work back and forth with one another. If the consumer at the end of the day is not happy with how they're treated, they'll go somewhere else. We tend to not ever have that problem in credit union land because we're member-owned, democratically controlled financial institutions. Our members tell us exactly what to do, and that's all we can do. Fourth, there's a reporting requirement in 144306 that says if an unauthorized transaction, if they discover or are notified of an unauthorized transaction, they would have to report to the commissioner or to a consumer. The only person who can tell us that something was unauthorized is the consumer. If the consumer says this was unauthorized, yeah, if it just said, if a consumer says it's unauthorized, report it to the commissioner, that would make sense. But to say that out of the millions and billions of transactions that go on every single day, that somehow a financial institution would have any idea of what is unauthorized, and then bring in the liability of if a consumer has an expectation that we know something in their account was unauthorized and we didn't report it, under this bill, we would be liable, but it's an impossible standard because the only person who can say that something is unauthorized is the consumer. Lastly, the Regulation E disclosures. Senator, we agree 100%. They're overburdensome, they're long, they're dense, they're insane. That is a symptom of federal regulation. We have no control over that. There are 13 requirements currently, which I've listed in my testimony, just for Regulation E. We wish that somehow the federal government would say, let's make this really simple for you and really simple for them. The reason we don't is because of lawsuits, and everybody wants to have everything written out, that these over the years have become extremely dense. So adding anything to these regulations, especially with credit unions, who most of them are very small institutions, they don't do their own compliance work 100% in-house. It's farmed out to partner companies that do this nationwide. So to tell a partner company, hey, just for Maryland, we need to add these things, they might look back and say, no, the other 49 states don't require it. You do, sorry about your luck. You got to do this in-house now. And they can't do it, which is, once again, why it remains federal. I know I'm going on here. Does anybody want me to explain why Regulation E does not apply to businesses accounts? It'll take me
not unless one of the members asks,
Okay.
because we're running out of time.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Are there any other questions of this witness? And if anybody has a question, you seem like a friendly person. You'd be willing to answer your phone and try to help them.
Of course.
Okay. Thank you. All right. We've got one additional witness, John Bretsakis.
Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity. I think Rory did a great job summarizing our testimony, and also I would just lend comment, and I think Senator Kramer, your comments about the notice, the notification period. Our focus really is on the consumer, because that's the focus of credit unions, is on the consumer and focusing on those things. I was a 25-year credit union practitioner, CEO, dealing with consumers, and we've been dealing with consumer protection issues and ways to protect consumer data for decades. And one of those issues, and that's why, especially with the statement notification, the 60-day notification that already is in law has worked very well for consumers. It has been that, and there are provisions, and from a very practical purpose and a business practice purpose, they've worked for consumers. And I know one of the comments, especially the way the bill is written, with regards to the notification on the outside of the envelope, we've gone through a complete iteration of doing everything we can to make someone's financial information as nondescript as possible. The last thing we want to do is draw attention to somebody's mail. And I've had to deal with people who have had their mail stolen, and that's how the fraud is perpetrated. So those types of things we have to take a look into. But to go contrary to a federal regulation just for the state of Maryland, and if it's, especially for something that's not a common practice or something that we've heard from our credit unions, and again, we're speaking primarily from the consumer standpoint, we'll have to go back to our credit unions and talk with them about their business accounts to see if they've had any of these experiences, and if their practices vary from the current regulations. So we can get back to you on that, but I do want to just reiterate from a consumer protection standpoint, as far as notifications, disclosures, what's on the back of somebody's statement, it's very challenging because it's very hard to force someone to read through their statements, even when they get it. So to push from 60 to 90 days, I don't know if there's any empirical evidence that that would do anything to improve or reduce the amount of fraud that occurs on someone's account. From going from 60 to 90, I don't see how that actually adds or benefits the consumer any more than the 60 days that's already afforded to them.
Okay, are there any questions? Senator Kramer?
John, you just said that the 60 days has worked really well, and then you repeated that statement and said the 60 days has worked really well. Why wouldn't we give our small businesses that same protection if it has worked so really well in current practice with people who don't happen to have a small business and bank with you or whomever? Why wouldn't we want to have it work really well for them also?
Senator, I can't speak to the practices of all of our credit unions from a business perspective and their business accounts. So I would have to ask them from what their procedures are. As you've stated, right, each institution has an opportunity to have their set standards, and those can be adapted. I think Mr. Enton mentioned that from the banking perspective, so they would be able to give a more clear.
So you don't have an explanation as to why it works really well, but don't do it over here to help them work really well?
I can't speak to the fact that I can't speak to your question of how often this happens to businesses. I think Kaylee would be able to.
Because we have no record of it, and that's part of this bill has the reporting that Rory said that seemed so offensive that we would have the reporting. Well, that's the point, so that we do know. I know that obviously you all are here adamantly opposing the bill, so it must happen with enough frequency that you don't want the loss to be the burden of the banks. You want it to be the individuals who lost the money.
Can I chime in for a
And
second?
I think that's a concern. Rory, I'm not asking you any questions. Thank you. I asked my question of John. He's answered it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Kramer, if I could just
All right,
mention
thank you.
one thing.
All right, and then you'll have the last word here because we've got to vote in a half hour. Okay. Go ahead.
I just would like to make the one comment. The assumption that the reason we are opposed to the bill is that we are trying to somehow disenfranchise consumers, I believe is unfair. I think our opposition to the bill is around unneeded regulation, and unwarranted regulation is really more the issue of what we're speaking to. We're not trying to justify anyone stealing money from anyone. And I think credit unions have been on record of protecting consumers as much as any other entity.
Thank you for that, John. I appreciate it.
Okay. All right. This ends the hearing today. If we can be in our seats at 4:45, members, we'll start to our voting session at that time. Thank you. And thanks to everybody.